Hey, Warrior Saints, happy Wednesday and a happy belated birthday to Dr. Seuss. Yesterday was Dr. Seuss's birthday, and typically in America, when we celebrate Dr. Seuss's birthday in gratitude for everything that he had done to help educate children, all the books that he had written, we have what we call National Literacy Day, in which kids are encouraged to read not only Dr. Seuss's books, but books in general. This year, Dr. Seuss's birthday was a little bit different because this cancel culture that we've been talking about over the past few days and kind of an inability to just think beyond what people are being told to think and how people are told to think, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, the trust essentially that is entrusted with Dr. Seuss's estate, told the publisher that they are going to no longer print six Dr. Seuss's books. Six of some of his lesser-known books, but also If I Ran the Zoo, which is one of his more well-known books. Interestingly enough, I went to find If I Ran the Zoo on Amazon last night, and it was for sale for $1,500, which is just astounding because it's so funny to see how quickly when the tides change, how quickly some people are able to try to capitalize on that. But what was said is that these books needed to be no longer published because they represented people in a way that was hurtful, in a way that was, no longer okay. I mean, I guess really it was never okay, but for whatever reason, societal norms thought it was okay at one point, and now because we're more enlightened, we're more woke, we're more awake, we see things more, right? We're more able to see that Dr. Seuss's books that we used to think were okay, are no longer okay. In fact, one Virginia school district even went so far as to say the following in response to this, that they've advised their schools to de-emphasize Dr. Seuss books on Read Across America Day, the national literacy program that takes place on the anniversary of Mr. Geisel's birth. Now, of course, Mr. Geisel is Dr. Seuss. That was his given name, Theodore Geisel. It was interesting as well in this article to see that they no longer called him Dr. Seuss throughout the article. They kept referring to him as Mr. Geisel, which I guess could be an attempt to be respectful of Dr. Seuss's personhood, that he's actually Mr. Geisel, or is it an attempt to say, well, we love Dr. Seuss, so we can't say anything bad about him? It's easier to say that Dr. Geisel, Mr. Geisel, is the one who we are going after. It's fascinating how the human psyche works, and today's epistle actually gives us a little insight. Coming from the first universal letter of St. John, it says, "Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him." It's fascinating, this idea that our hearts condemn us when we betray God's commandments. How often when we're going about these things where we think we have to do certain things because everyone else is telling us what we need to do and we're being told a certain way to think and a certain way to act, a certain way to do, we actually are betraying God's commandments. Because in this attempt to go after Dr. Seuss, when we start calling him Mr. Geisel and we stop talking about him, we forget that we love Dr. Seuss. We love this beloved man who maybe he didn't do everything correctly. Maybe he isn't perfect. Shocking that a human being isn't perfect, right? But that doesn't mean that we need to completely erase things that used to be. It's interesting that St. John goes on in this letter to say what God's commandments are, what we are called to do to keep those commandments. This is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he, Christ, commanded us. We're called to love one another, and not just love one another in this way that goes after one another. Because if we're simply going after one another, we are not following God's commandments. We are doing precisely what the world is telling us to do. We're following all these other false teachers. We're following all these other people that are saying, do this, do that, think this, think that. Look here, look there. Don't look at that. Don't look at this. But look at this. Look at this. This is shiny. This is new. This is something that we want you to see. This is something that we want you to ignore. This is how we want you to think. And we want you to stop thinking. And it's interesting that in this morning's epistle, St. John even talks about this. And he says, little children, you are of God and have overcome them. Them being the false teachers of the world. Them being the people of the world that do not follow God's commandments. What St. John goes so far as to call the AntiChrist. Those things that are in place of Christ, which is literally what AntiChrist means. Those things that distract us, that say shiny, 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 and we forget to look at who God is. You are of God and have overcome those things. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore what they say is of the world, and the world listens to them. And you might be saying, what does that mean? Like the world listens to them, they are of the world. Okay, I kind of get that. We're supposed to go beyond that. We're supposed to rise above that. We're supposed to get through that. I think really what they're saying is wake up and think. Follow God's commandments. Saturate your mind with the commandments of God. Saturate yourself with the love of God that is self-sacrificial, that is crucifixional. And get rid of all the other junk. Move beyond all of that. Because it's going to be difficult. And we don't always want to do those things that are difficult. We might not always want to see that the history that we have that has made us who we are is not necessarily the history that we want it to be. I'll give you a prime example. I was a music education major for 3 years of college. I can tell the story of why I didn't end up with a music education degree in a way that makes me look like a hero, or in the real way, that was I faced a little bit of adversity and maybe got out before it just kept going because it was just getting bad. And even as I'm telling you this story now, kind of like in a raw way, in a little bit of an embarrassed way, I'm even in my mind thinking, well, but it wasn't exactly like that. It's a little more nuanced than that. I mean, come on. It is what it is. It was something that happened when I was in college. It wasn't like one thing. It was a decision that I made in college. There were decisions that I had made that led up to making that decision. And I ended up with a degree in vocal performance. It has shaped who I am. Now, I can do one of two things. I can whitewash that history to make it only look like it was somebody else's fault and that it was purely the evil music ed department faculty that did what they did, and therefore I am now no longer teaching music, but instead I'm standing in front of cameras talking to you about the gospel. Or I can say, thank God that I had the experiences that led me to there so I don't make those mistakes again in the future. And I can be changed by it. But we don't always like to do that, right? We want to hear a story that fits within our narrative, that tells us what we want to hear, that tells us that it's okay to cancel someone else because we don't like what they're saying. And therefore, we have to even cancel some parts of our own history, whether it's shared history or our individual history, so that it matches what we want, so that we can continue going along the path that we've decided to go along, which is often the path away from God. And it's interesting because Scripture talks about this too. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3, we hear, "The time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, right teaching, correct teaching, the teaching that might take us outside of our comfort zone, the teaching that might push us to be better. But having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own liking." We'll accumulate for ourselves not teachers that push us, but teachers that tell us what we want to hear so that we can go out and continue living our lives away from God the way that we want to, not along the path that is tough, the path that is narrow, the path that leads to God. So today, the day after Dr. Seuss's birthday, we have an opportunity to get back on the path. We can either not go back on the path, continue down this path that the world is offering us, or we can start to stand up for ourselves and get back on the path that God has laid out for us. That is the way of the warrior saint. I'm going to end with a beautiful quote from Dr. Seuss himself that says, "The more that you read, the more things you'll know. The more that you learn, the more places you go." Now I challenge you, don't let others decide what you will read. Don't let others decide the places you'll go because of their agenda. Adopt Christ's agenda as your agenda, following his commandments, loving one another the way that he has commanded us to love, which is to lay down our lives for the sake of other. That path that we call crucifixional living, that way that we call the way of the warrior saint. And while we're talking about reading, this is what we're here to do. This is why Father Chris has come out with his new book, The Way of the Warrior Saint. It is precisely there to guide us along the path of crucifixional living, along the way that Christ has called us to go. And I urge you, visit warriorsaints.org/book, pick up your copy of The Way of the Warrior Saint, How to Live a Crucifixional Life. I was very lucky I got to read the book ahead of time. I'm very lucky that I get to work with Father Chris every single day talking about these things. I told him jokingly one day that he has become that voice in the back of my head, pushing me to go outside of my comfort zone, pushing me to do the things that I know I'm supposed to do, even when I want to do those things that maybe I want to do, that are easier, that are maybe the things that I shouldn't do. It's a fabulous read. It's an easy read, and it's something that I urge you to get so that you can be changed by it the way that it's changed my life as well. Additionally, visit us at warriorsaints.org. Sign up for the Way of the Warrior Saint. Every week you'll get a video that is doing these same things, telling us how to, guiding us, really, not just telling us, guiding us along the path that is Christ. Our goal is not to be your teacher. Our goal is not to simply be the people that are teaching you how to live and what to think. Our goal is to hopefully open up the scriptures for you so that you can see those commandments that God has given us, so that you can also follow that way of the warrior saint, that path that leads us through the cross to the empty tomb. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow at our usual time. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday. And until next time, keep walking on the way of the warrior saint.